Have you ever wondered why you do certain things? Like why you bite your nails when you're nervous. Or maybe you have a weird, totally irrational fear of something and you have no idea where it came from. We all have these habits, right? These reactions that just feel automatic, almost like they're programmed into us. Well, about a century ago, a new way of thinking about psychology came along. It's called behaviorism. And it had this really powerful and kind of simple explanation for all of it. So let's get into it. All right, so here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll break down what behaviorism actually is. Then, we're going to meet its founder, a guy named John B. Watson, and unpack his super famous and pretty infamous Little Albert experiment. After that, we'll look at how B.F. Skinner took these ideas and pushed them even further. And finally, we'll see just how much these theories still shape our world today. So, the main idea behind behaviorism was honestly pretty radical for its time. It basically said, to understand people, you have to forget about their internal thoughts and feelings. Just ignore all that stuff and focus on one thing and one thing only: what they actually do, their observable actions. So here's the more official definition. Behaviorism argued that if psychology wanted to be a real science, like biology or chemistry, it had to stop guessing about things it couldn't see. No more trying to figure out dreams or the unconscious. It could only study what could be seen and measured. So, you look at a stimulus from the environment and you watch the response that it causes. That's it. This whole school of thought really rests on a few key pillars. First, as we said, only observable behavior counts. Second, every single thing we do is learned through a process they called conditioning. And this leads to a huge belief that your environment, nurture, is way, way more important than your genes, your nature. And finally, this was a direct shot at Freud and all that psychoanalysis stuff. It completely rejected the idea of studying dreams or using introspection to understand the mind. And that brings us to the guy who really kicked this whole thing off, the very influential and, let's say, outspoken psychologist John B. Watson, and his idea of classical behaviorism. Watson had this absolutely brilliant analogy for his whole approach. He said, the human mind, all our thoughts, our feelings, our secret hopes, it's a black box. We can't see inside it, right? So trying to guess what's going on in there isn't science, it's just guesswork. All we need to do is study the stimulus that goes into the box and the behavior that comes out. The box itself, totally irrelevant. And this quote, wow, this really shows you just how radical Watson's beliefs were. He was a huge believer in something called environmental determinism. This idea that our environment is everything. It's what makes us who we are, not our DNA. He seriously believed that if you gave him any baby, he could use the right conditioning to shape that child into literally anything he wanted: a doctor, a lawyer, even a thief. Now, Watson didn't just pull this idea out of thin air. His work was built on the super famous experiments of Ivan Pavlov. You've probably heard of them. Pavlov showed that you could get a dog to drool at the sound of a bell just by ringing that bell every time before you gave it food. The dog learned to associate the bell with the food. So Watson's big question was, what if this same simple process could explain something as complex as human emotion? And this is where the story of Little Albert comes in. Watson decided to prove his theory with one of the most famous and, frankly, ethically questionable experiments in the history of psychology. He wanted to show once and for all that an emotion as powerful as fear isn't something you're born with, it's something you learn. The subject of this experiment was a 9-month-old baby, known to history only as Little Albert, and the goal was chillingly simple. Could they take something that Albert had absolutely no fear of and condition him to be terrified of it? Okay, so here's how they did it. First, the baseline. They showed Little Albert a fuzzy white rat. And he was fine. He was curious, even playful. No fear at all. Then, the conditioning started. Every single time they showed him the rat, Watson would sneak up behind him and smash a hammer into a steel bar. It made this awful, terrifyingly loud noise. After doing this just a few times, the result was undeniable. The moment Albert saw the rat, even with no noise, he would just burst into tears. But here's where it gets even crazier. It didn't stop with the rat. Albert's new fear started to spread. It generalized. He wasn't just afraid of the white rat anymore. He became terrified of a white rabbit, a dog, even a Santa Claus mask with a fluffy white beard. For Watson, this was huge. He believed he had proven that phobias weren't some deep, dark, unconscious problem. They were just learned responses to the environment. So, Years later, another psychologist named B.F. Skinner comes along, and he takes these ideas in a whole new direction. He argued that, yeah, the initial stimulus is important, but what really shapes our behavior is what happens after we do something, the consequences. And this created a really key difference between the two ideas. Watson's classical conditioning is all about learning through association, right? A bell gets paired with food, and that triggers an automatic response. But Skinner's operant conditioning is about learning through consequences. It deals with voluntary actions, things we choose to do, and how those actions are controlled by rewards and punishments. So the theory itself is really simple. If you do something and you get a reward for it, what we call positive reinforcement, you're probably going to do it again. But if you do something and you get punished, you're less likely to repeat it. I mean, think about a student in class who answers a question. If the teacher praises them, that praise is a reward. It makes that student more likely to raise their hand next time. That's operant conditioning right there. Now, Skinner took this idea to its absolute extreme. He basically argued that your personality isn't a real thing that's inside you. Nope. Instead, it's just the collection of all your learned behaviors. The person we call confident, that's just someone who, over their life, has been rewarded again and again for speaking up. And the person we call shy, well, maybe they were punished or just ignored when they tried to do the same thing. Your personality, to Skinner, is just the sum total of your personal history of reinforcement. Okay, so these theories might sound a little old-fashioned, a bit black and white, but the principles of behaviorism have had an absolutely massive, lasting impact on the world we live in right now. Seriously, its influence is everywhere. Think about education. The whole idea of reward systems, getting gold stars in class, earning points in a learning app, that is pure behaviorism. Or in therapy, something called exposure therapy helps people get over phobias by slowly deconditioning their fear. Even common parenting tricks like reward charts for chores or using a timeout, that's all designed to reinforce good behavior. Oh, and the way we train our pets with clickers and treats, that is a direct application of Skinner's operant conditioning. Now, of course, behaviorism is not without its critics. A lot of psychologists argue that completely ignoring our internal thoughts, our feelings, our creativity, it just gives a really simplistic, almost mechanical view of what it means to be human. It kind of treats us like robots just responding to things. And by focusing so much on the environment, it really doesn't leave much room for the very real influence of our biology and our genetics on who we become. And that really leaves us with this one big question to chew on. We know our thoughts matter. We know our biology matters. But how much of who you are, your little habits, your deepest fears, your biggest ambitions, how much of that is just the product of your own unique history of rewards and punishments? When you really get down to it, are we just the sum of our conditioning? It's a pretty powerful idea to think about.